The most dangerous thing you will ever do is stay silent while someone builds a wrong opinion of you, and then live inside that opinion as if it were true. There is a particular kind of pain that doesn't have a loud name. It is not the pain of a sudden betrayal or a public humiliation. It is quieter than that. More patient. More insidious. It is the pain of being in a room full of people, people who know you, people who have benefited from you, people who have leaned on your competence, your generosity, your presence, and realizing that not one of them actually sees what you are worth. They see what you have allowed them to see. And what you have allowed them to see, through your silence, your over-accommodation, your willingness to accept less than you deserve in the name of keeping the peace, is a version of you that is smaller than the truth. That ends today. Because what we are talking about in this conversation is not how to demand respect. Demanding respect is what people do when they have already lost it. What we are talking about is something far more powerful, far more lasting, and far more aligned with the philosophy of the greatest minds in human history. We are talking about how to teach it. Quietly. Consistently. Without a single word of self-promotion. Through 7 laws that, when understood and lived, not just read, not just nodded at, but genuinely lived, make it structurally impossible for the people around you to undervalue you again. This is the conversation. Let's go deep. Law 1, your standards are your autobiography. Before a word leaves your mouth, before you have introduced yourself, explained your background, listed your accomplishments or stated your expectations, you have already communicated something to every person in the room. You have communicated your standards. And your standards are the most honest autobiography you will ever write. Not the one you post online. Not the one you describe in conversations about who you are and what you believe. The one you live. The one written in what you accept and what you don't. What you allow and what you quietly, firmly, without drama or explanation, decline. There was a woman named Adiz who worked in a corporate environment where her contributions were consistently acknowledged less than those of her male colleagues. Not dramatically. Not in ways she could easily point to. Just consistently, her ideas credited to others, her presence overlooked in rooms she had prepared for, her expertise consulted and then unreferenced. For 3 years, Adiz managed this by working harder. By producing more. By telling herself that eventually the quality of her output would speak loudly enough to correct the imbalance. It didn't. Because the people around her were not reading her output. They were reading her standards. And her standards, communicated through 3 years of silent acceptance, told them that this treatment was within the range of what she would tolerate. The day everything changed was not the day Adiz gave a speech or made a demand. It was the day she quietly, calmly, without raising her voice or making a scene, began responding differently to the small things. When an idea of hers was attributed to someone else in a meeting, she said, without aggression, "Yes, I'm glad Marcus built on that, it was something I raised in last Tuesday's session." When she was overlooked for a project she was qualified to lead, she walked into her manager's office and said simply, "I'd like to understand what the criteria are for project leadership. I want to make sure I'm positioning myself correctly." Small. Precise. Undramatic. But the message was unmistakable, the standards have changed. And the room, which had been reading her standards for 3 years, updated its reading accordingly. Epictetus said, "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do." Your standards are the answer to that first question, made visible. They are the autobiography that precedes every conversation, every relationship, every professional interaction you will ever have. Write it carefully. Write it honestly. And make sure it reflects the person you actually are, not the person you have been performing for someone else's comfort. Law 2, scarcity is not cruelty, it is clarity. Here is a truth that will rearrange something in you if you let it land properly. People value what they cannot easily replace. This is not cynicism. This is not a manipulation strategy. It is one of the most consistent and well-documented principles of human psychology, and it operates whether you acknowledge it or not. When you are endlessly available, when you respond immediately to every message, drop everything for every request, adjust your schedule for every convenience, give your best to people who have made no investment in earning it, you are not being generous. You are being invisible. Because abundance, when it is given without discernment, without calibration, without any relationship to what has been offered in return, trains the people around you to stop noticing it. Like a landscape you pass every day on the way to work. Present. Consistent. Completely taken for granted. A man named Kwame was the person everyone called. Not because he was the most qualified person in his network, though he often was, but because he was the most available. Answer on the first ring. Response within minutes. Yes before the sentence was finished. For years, Kwame told himself this was a strength. He was dependable. Reliable. A person people could count on. What he didn't see, what took a deeply uncomfortable conversation with a mentor to make visible, was that his availability had made him, in the eyes of the people around him, ordinary. Not because he was ordinary. But because ordinary is what we call the things we never have to think about obtaining. His mentor said something that changed Kwame's life in 9 words. People protect what they are afraid of losing. Kwame was not afraid of. He was simply always there. He began, slowly and deliberately, to introduce calibration into his availability. He stopped answering immediately. He started finishing his own work before redirecting his attention to other people's requests. He began saying, calmly, without guilt, I can't give this the attention it deserves right now. Let me come back to you on Thursday. Something shifted almost immediately. People started preparing more before they brought things to him. They started valuing his input more specifically, because they now knew it came with a cost of patience. They started, without anyone saying a word about it, treating him differently. He had not changed what he offered. He had changed the conditions under which he offered it. And the perceived value followed. The Stoics were meticulous stewards of their inner resources, their time, their attention, their wisdom. Not because they were selfish. But because they understood that resources given without discernment help no one, least of all the giver. Guard your availability. Not as a game. As an honest reflection of what your time and energy are actually worth. Because they are worth more than you have been charging. Law 3, silence is the most sophisticated language you will ever speak. Most people, when they feel undervalued, make the same mistake. They talk. They explain their worth. They list their contributions. They build arguments for why they deserve to be seen differently. They send long messages and have long conversations and lay out their case with the thoroughness of someone preparing a legal brief. And it almost never works. Not because the argument is wrong. But because worth, communicated verbally, always sounds like insecurity, regardless of how true it is. The moment you begin advocating for your own value in words, you have already signaled that you are uncertain it will be recognized without your help. The most valuable people in any room are almost never the loudest ones in it. There was a professor named Dr. Mensah who had spent 30 years building one of the most extraordinary minds in his field. When he walked into a room, whether it was a lecture hall or a boardroom or a dinner party full of strangers, something happened that his students and colleagues described in almost identical terms. You just knew. You knew, before he said anything significant, that this was someone different. Not because of how he dressed. Not because of how loudly he spoke. But because of what he didn't do. He didn't rush to fill silences. He didn't perform enthusiasm for ideas he found weak. He didn't laugh at things that weren't funny or agree with positions he found questionable. He listened, completely, unhurriedly, and when he finally spoke, it was with the measured precision of someone who had given the words full consideration before releasing them. His silence was not absence. It was weight. And it made everything he eventually said carry a gravity that other people's constant talking could never achieve. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." Apply that standard to your speech. Ruthlessly. Not to become cold or withholding, but to make every word you speak count. To make your presence in a conversation mean something because you are not filling it with noise. The person who speaks only when they have something genuine to contribute becomes, over time, the person whose contribution everyone waits for. That is not silence as absence. That is silence as authority. Law 4, how you treat yourself is the loudest instruction manual you will ever publish. Nobody will value you more than you visibly value yourself. Read that again. Slowly. Because it contains something that most conversations about self-worth completely miss. They focus on what other people should do differently, how they should treat you, see you, acknowledge you. And while those things matter, they are downstream of something far more foundational. How you treat yourself. The way you speak about yourself in casual conversation. Whether you apologize for your presence or occupy your space without apology. Whether you keep your commitments to yourself with the same seriousness with which you keep them to others. Whether you invest in your own development with the same generosity you extend to everyone else. These things are visible. Not always consciously, people rarely sit down and think, ah yes, I am observing how this person treats themselves and calibrating my response accordingly. But the calibration happens. Automatically. Below the threshold of deliberate awareness. A woman named Nora had a habit she didn't know she had. Every time someone complimented her work, she deflected. Oh, it was nothing, really. I just got lucky. Anyone could have done it. Every time she had a genuinely valuable idea in a meeting, she prefaced it with, this might be completely off, and probably others have thought of this already, but. She thought she was being humble. What she was actually doing was providing the room with a script. And the room, obligingly, without malice, was reading it. If she said her work was nothing special, who were they to disagree? If she prefaced every idea with a disclaimer, why would they receive it with more confidence than she offered it? The day Nora stopped doing this was not the day she became arrogant. She was never in danger of that. It was the day she became accurate. She started receiving compliments with a simple, grounded, thank you. I worked hard on it. She started presenting ideas without the prefatory apology, here is something I think could work, and then stated it cleanly. Within months, the room's response to her had shifted in ways she hadn't predicted. Not because she had changed what she was doing. Because she had changed the instruction manual she was publishing about how it should be received. Epictetus understood this with characteristic sharpness. He wrote that we suffer not from the events of our lives but from our judgments about those events. When we judge our own contributions as negligible before anyone else has the chance to evaluate them, we have already done the work of undervaluing ourselves. Save others the trouble. Treat yourself like someone worth treating well. Consistently. Publicly. Without apology. The people around you are watching. And they are taking notes. Law 5, walk away from what diminishes you, and mean it. There is no law in this conversation that requires more courage than this one. And there is no law that teaches your worth more clearly. Walking away, genuinely, completely, without the secret hope that the exit will prompt them to finally see what they were losing, is the most unambiguous statement of value a human being can make. Not threatening to walk away. Not announcing that you might walk away if things don't change. Walking away. Quietly, finally, with the settled certainty of someone who has made a decision rather than issued an ultimatum. Because ultimatums are still about them. They are still asking the other person to determine your worth by their response. A true exit is about you. It is the physical, external enactment of an internal decision you have already made, that your peace, your dignity, your continued growth are worth more than whatever this diminishing situation is offering. There was a man named Samuel who had built a business partnership over 5 years. His partner, charming, well-connected, and deeply skilled at taking credit for collective effort, had spent those 5 years systematically eroding Samuel's confidence, minimizing his contributions, and positioning himself as the indispensable center of everything they had built together. Samuel stayed. Because he had invested 5 years. Because he told himself it would get better. Because walking away felt like losing. Until the day he understood something that changed the entire frame. Staying was the loss. Every day he remained in a dynamic that communicated, through 1,000 small actions, that his worth was negotiable. He was not preserving his investment. He was extending it. Paying more into a system that had already demonstrated it would not pay him back. He left. Quietly. Without a speech. Without a dramatic confrontation. And the moment he did, the moment his absence became real rather than theoretical, the people who had been watching from the outside told him something he hadn't expected. We always wondered why you stayed. They had seen his worth all along. They had simply been following his lead on whether it was non-negotiable. Seneca wrote, "It is not that I am brave, it is that I know what matters." Knowing what matters is what makes walking away possible. Not bravery in the dramatic sense. Just clarity. The simple, grounded, unshakable clarity of someone who knows what they are worth, and has decided that worth is not subject to negotiation. 5 laws in. And I want you to notice something about all 5 of them. Not one of them required you to raise your voice. Not one of them required a confrontation. Not one of them involved telling anyone what you are worth. They all work through the same mechanism, the quiet, consistent, undeniable communication of someone who has stopped waiting for permission to occupy their full value. Your standards. Your calibrated availability. Your authoritative silence. Your visible self-respect. Your willingness to walk away from what diminishes you. These are not techniques. They are not performances. They are the natural, external expression of an internal shift that, once made, changes how every room receives you, before you have said a single word. We left off at 5 laws. And if you have been sitting with what part 1 laid down, truly sitting with it, not just listening but feeling where it lands against your own life, then something in you is already shifting. Something is already reorganizing itself around a truth that, perhaps, you have known for a long time but hadn't yet found the language for. You have never been the problem. The problem has been the gap between who you actually are and what you have been willing to show, consistently, unapologetically, without waiting for the room's permission, to the world. The final 2 laws close that gap. Permanently. Law 6. Become excellent at something and let the excellence speak first. There is a version of teaching your worth that is entirely verbal. It lives in how you introduce yourself, how you describe what you do, how you position your contributions in conversation. And while the laws we have already covered address that dimension with precision, there is another dimension that goes deeper than anything words can reach. It is the dimension of undeniable, observable, repeated excellence. Because here is what nobody can argue with. Not the colleague who takes credit. Not the partner who minimizes. Not the environment that has been conditioned to overlook you. Not the room that hasn't yet updated its reading of who you are. Nobody can argue with results they can see. Excellence is the most persuasive language in existence. It requires no translation. It carries no ego. It makes no demands and issues no ultimatums. It simply exists, quietly, consistently, compounding over time, until the weight of it becomes impossible to ignore. Let me tell you about a woman named Yvonne. Yvonne worked in an industry where relationships and visibility determined everything. Who you knew. Who knew you. Who mentioned your name in the right rooms. She was not well connected. She did not come from the right background. She did not have the social fluency that seemed to open doors effortlessly for others around her. What she had was craft. She gave 10 years to becoming genuinely, deeply, extraordinarily good at what she did. Not good enough. Not competitive. Extraordinary. The kind of excellence that takes years of focused, unglamorous, solitary development to build, and that, once built, radiates something that no amount of networking or self-promotion can manufacture. People started talking about her work before they talked about her. And then they started talking about her. Not because she had positioned herself correctly. Not because she had said the right things to the right people. But because the work had gone ahead of her and prepared every room before she entered it. By the time Yvonne walked into spaces that had previously been closed to her, they were not just open. They were waiting. Marcus Aurelius wrote something in his private journals that was never meant for anyone else to read, which is perhaps why it carries the particular weight that it does. He wrote, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one. Stop arguing, with others, with yourself, with the circumstances that seem designed to overlook you, about what you are worth. Become something worth arguing about. Give yourself to the development of genuine, specific, repeatable excellence. Not the performance of it. Not the appearance of it. The real thing, built in the hours nobody sees, sustained through the periods when nothing seems to be happening, maintained with the quiet devotion of someone who understands that the work is not separate from the worth. The work is the worth. And excellence, once it is real, once it has been built on the foundation of years of honest, focused, relentless development, does not need an advocate. It advocates for itself. Every single time. Law 7, consistency is the only currency that never loses its value. We have arrived at the final law. And I have saved it for last deliberately, because it is the one that makes every other law work. It is the mortar between the bricks. The foundation beneath the foundation. The thing that transforms isolated acts of self-respect into an unassailable identity. Consistency. Not consistency as rigidity. Not consistency as the inability to change or grow or adapt. But consistency as the daily, undramatic, non-negotiable practice of being the same person, holding the same standards, maintaining the same self-respect, applying the same discernment, regardless of who is watching, regardless of how inconvenient it is, regardless of whether anyone acknowledges it. Here is why consistency is irreplaceable in the teaching of worth. People do not form lasting impressions from single moments. They form them from patterns. The brain is, at its core, a pattern recognition machine, and what it registers most reliably is not the exceptional moment but the reliable pattern. Not what you did once under ideal circumstances, but what you do repeatedly under all circumstances. This means that a single act of self-respect, as powerful as it might feel in the moment, can be dismissed as an anomaly. An off day. A temporary assertion that will probably not hold. People who have been accustomed to undervaluing you do not update their behavior based on one data point. They wait. Consciously or not, they test the pattern. And if the pattern doesn't hold, if the boundary erected on Tuesday has quietly dissolved by Friday, if the standard raised in one conversation has been lowered again by the next, the lesson they take is not that you have worth. The lesson they take is that your worth is negotiable under the right conditions. And they will spend a great deal of energy finding those conditions. Let me tell you about a man named Emeka. Emeka had spent years being the person in his family who absorbed everything. Every crisis. Every financial emergency. Every phone call that came at the wrong hour asking for something that cost more than it should. He was generous, genuinely, warmly, abundantly generous. And his family, reading that generosity accurately, had organized their expectations of him around it. Then Emeka began the work of teaching his worth. He had one powerful conversation with his older brother, calm, clear, honest, in which he expressed what he needed the relationship to look like going forward. His brother listened. Agreed. Seemed genuinely moved. 3 weeks later, the old pattern reasserted itself. A request that crossed every line Emeka had just articulated, delivered as if the conversation had never happened. The old Emeka would have accommodated it. Would have told himself that the relationship mattered more than the principle. Would have quietly absorbed the cost and told himself that next time would be different. The new Emeka, the one who understood that consistency was the only lesson that held, responded exactly as he had said he would. Not angrily. Not with a reminder of the previous conversation. Just, consistently. In complete alignment with what he had already communicated. His brother was surprised. then resistant. Then, over the following months, something shifted. Not because Emeka had persuaded him with arguments or worn him down with repetition. But because the pattern had become undeniable. Because the new standard had been applied consistently enough that it was no longer a statement Emeka had made. It was a fact about who Emeka was. And facts, unlike statements, do not require defense. They simply exist. Solid, immovable, no longer subject to negotiation. Seneca wrote in a letter that I return to more than almost anything else in his body of work. Hang on to this thought and you will have many days of festivity. Every day, in fact, will be a festivity for you if only you believe that you are no longer in bondage. Consistency is how you leave the bondage of other people's undervaluation permanently. Not by announcing your departure, but by living, day after day, in such complete alignment with your own worth that the old bondage simply has no architecture left to attach itself to. Every consistent choice is a brick. Every maintained standard is a load-bearing wall. Every quiet, firm, undramatic application of these 7 laws, repeated not once, not occasionally, but always, builds something that no one can take down. Not because you have built walls against the world, but because you have built a self so solidly constructed, so honestly inhabited, so thoroughly grounded in its own value, that undervaluation cannot find a structural weakness to exploit. The portrait, all 7 laws live together. I want to give you a portrait. Not an abstract concept. A living, breathing, daily portrait of what it looks like when all 7 laws are being practiced simultaneously. This person wakes up and their first act is not to check what the world thinks of them. Their first act is to honor their own standards, in the quiet choices of the morning that no one else will see. They move through their day with calibrated availability, present and generous with the people and pursuits that have earned it, and peacefully unavailable to the ones that haven't. When they speak, it means something. Because they don't speak to fill space. They speak when they have something genuine to contribute, and the room has learned, through repeated experience, that when this person opens their mouth, it is worth stopping to listen. They carry themselves with the visible self-respect of someone who has made peace with their own value. Not loudly. Not performatively. Just, accurately. They receive recognition without deflecting it. They occupy their space without apologizing for it. When something in their life diminishes them, consistently, unmistakably, beyond the reach of patience or good faith, they leave it. Not dramatically. Not as a statement. Simply because they have decided that their continued presence in diminishing circumstances is not a price they are willing to pay. They have dedicated themselves to genuine excellence, to becoming so specifically, so deeply, so honestly good at what they do that the quality of their work becomes the loudest thing about them in every room they enter. And through all of it, through every day and every interaction and every moment of temptation to slip back into old accommodations, they are consistent. Boringly, beautifully, powerfully consistent. So consistent that the people around them stop testing the edges of what is acceptable, because the edges have proven, through repeated encounter, to be immovable. That is the portrait. And I want you to notice something about the person in it. They never once gave a speech about their worth. They never argued for it. Never demanded it. Never explained it. Never listed it. Never sent the long message laying out all the reasons they deserved to be treated differently. They simply lived it. Every single day. In ways large and small, visible and invisible, acknowledged and unacknowledged. Until the living itself became the argument, and the argument became so obvious, so consistent, so structurally woven into the fabric of everything they did, that there was nothing left to dispute. The thing nobody tells you about this work. Before I close, I want to say something honest. Something that most conversations about self-worth leave out because it complicates the clean, inspiring narrative. This work is not always comfortable. When you begin to raise your standards, genuinely, consistently, across all areas of your life, some people will not like it. The ones who benefited most from your previous standards will like it the least. They will call it a change. They will miss the version of you that was more accommodating, more available, more willing to absorb the costs of their comfort. Let them miss it. Because what they are missing is not actually you. What they are missing is their access to you, unchecked, uncalibrated, freely available on demand regardless of what they offered in return. That is not a version of you worth preserving. And the discomfort of watching certain people recalibrate, or choose to leave rather than recalibrate, is not a sign that you are doing something wrong. It is a sign that the lesson is landing. Worth that has been undervalued for a long time does not suddenly get respected without a period of adjustment. The adjustment is real. The resistance is real. The discomfort is real. But so is what comes after it. What comes after it is rooms that receive you differently. Relationships built on accuracy rather than convenience. A life whose shape reflects who you actually are rather than who you learn to be for other people's comfort. What comes after it is the quiet, settled, unshakable feeling of someone who no longer needs the room's permission to know what they are worth. Because they already know. And they have built a life, law by law, day by day, choice by choice, that makes that knowledge undeniable to everyone who encounters them. The final word. You came into this conversation carrying a weight that has a specific name. It is the weight of being seen as less than you are. Of giving more than you receive. Of watching people move through the world with a confidence in their own value that seems to come naturally to them, while you have been waiting, quietly and patiently, for someone to finally recognize what you have known about yourself all along. Stop waiting. Not because recognition doesn't matter. It does. We are human beings, and being seen accurately by the people in our lives is one of the deepest needs we carry. But because waiting for recognition without doing the work of teaching it is like waiting for someone to read a book you never wrote. Write the book. Every day. In your standards, your calibrated availability, your authoritative silence, your visible self-respect, your willingness to walk away, your commitment to excellence, your unbreakable consistency. Write it so clearly, so honestly, so repeatedly, that anyone who encounters you has no choice but to read it accurately. You are not asking to be seen as more than you are. You are finally, fully, unapologetically refusing to be seen as less. That is not arrogance. That is the most honest thing you will ever do. Subscribe to the Stoic. This is the Stoic path. And this channel exists for one reason, to have the conversations that go deep enough to actually change something. Not just inspire for an afternoon. Not just produce a feeling that fades by morning. But to give you the kind of grounded, philosophically rooted, genuinely honest perspective that stays with you. That reorganizes something. That makes you move through the world a little differently than you did before you pressed play. If that is what you are here for, subscribe right now. Hit the button. Turn on your notifications. Because there is more of this coming. More depth. More honesty. More of the real, difficult, beautiful work of building a life that reflects who you actually are. Share this with someone who needs it. Someone who has been quietly absorbing less than they deserve for far too long. Someone who is excellent in ways the room hasn't learned to see yet. Someone who is ready, even if they don't know it yet, to stop waiting for permission and start teaching the lesson themselves. Send it to them. They will know why you did. This is the Stoic path. And you, grounded, consistent, quietly powerful, and finally fully valued, are exactly where you were always meant to be.